Welcome to Alan Skorsky Reports. I'm Alan Skorsky. We are clearly living in a time of historical events and great miracles. After decades of Iran threatening to wipe Israel off the map, 2 weeks ago, Israel launched a preemptive strike against Iran, taking out their defense systems, killing their top military leaders and nuclear scientists, and essentially controlling the skies over Iran. This past weekend, President Trump ordered the bombing of Iran's most lethal nuclear enrichment sites in Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan using B-2 bombers that flew over 30 hours round trip from Missouri to Iran, totally undetected. Iran's retaliation against Israel and the U.S. showed that Iran was running on empty, and a couple of nights ago, President Trump announced on Truth Social that Israel and Iran had agreed to a quote-unquote ceasefire. It's still way too early to know what a ceasefire entails, but what we know for sure is that the mullahs of Iran have been decimated. For a brief history lesson, this is Iran's record. From 1979 to 1981, Iran held 66 U.S. hostages in our embassy. In 1983, Iran-backed Hezbollah terrorists killed 241 Marines in Beirut, and a suicide car bombing in Beirut that killed 63 people. In 1985, Hezbollah terrorists hijacked a TWA flight, killing a U.S. Navy diver. The list goes on, including Iran hit squads targeting President Trump and former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Today's guest is Dan Diker, president of the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs and former Secretary General of the World Jewish Congress. Dan, thank you so much for joining us this evening in Israel. For me, it's morning in New York. It's great to see you.
Pleasure to be with you, Alan.
Okay, so again, the news cycle moves so quickly. So I guess my first question is, and there's no particular order of events, a ceasefire has been declared. We know Iran fired missiles, killing 4 people in Beersheba. But in your opinion, what does a ceasefire entail? We know that with Hamas, a ceasefire would have meant allowing them to regroup and rearm. With Iran, it's a different story. What does a ceasefire entail? And should it mandate that Qatar, since they were involved, demand that Hamas release all the hostages immediately?
Well, first of all, thank you for the question and your implicit understanding of the Islamic definition of ceasefire, which is really Hudna, or the other word is Taadiya, which is the temporary calming down of hostilities. Hudna being an agreed upon period of time of cessation of hostilities. And you said it very accurately, until such time that they recalibrate, re-energize, restore, resupply, and then attack once again. That's as old as Islamic history. I think we can safely assume that it is quite similar in the radical Shiite eschatology, end of days, that in their culture, a Hudna is similar to the Sunni understanding of Hudna, because it's all based in Islamic history and culture. That the Iranian regime's number one objective, Alan, survive. So they're willing to do anything they have to do, agree to anything they have to agree to. At this moment, at the insistence of President Donald Trump, which he said it's time for ceasefire. So they said, fine, Mr. President, we'll go along with you, even though in their DNA, Alan, as you know very well as a student of the Middle East, as I am, they have no intention of viewing a ceasefire the way you and I or our viewers and friends in the West view ceasefire. They are number one, surviving, restoring, recalibrating, resupplying, re-energizing, and getting ready for the next round of conflict.
So now let's go back a little over a month ago, because your organization it's a think tank, and you analyze information as it comes in. Last month, Donald Trump visited the Middle East. He went to Qatar. They gave him a plane. He visited with Saudi Arabia. He visited with the Emiratis. He did not visit Israel. A lot of people were saying that, this is proof that Trump, is abandoning Israel. He's, reshaping alliances. And all the while, it looks like now that it was more of a deceit game, that he was throwing Iran off, that he was going to show that there's daylight between Israel and the U.S. and I suppose I wasn't at the meetings, but he was probably letting the Arab world know that something's going to happen soon. We expect your support. But what we all saw in the news was not what I think actually was going on. How did your organization at that time view that visit between him and Wickoff only going to the Middle East, only going to the Arab countries and not stopping by Israel? Did you see it as something different, or was there an analysis saying, let's let Trump be Trump, and there's more to it than we're saying?
I think the last part of your statement is absolutely accurate. Let President Trump be President Trump, and don't read too much into it with regard to his skipping Israel. If you'd like to know exactly at the 24 hours after he went to the Middle East, if you go to the Jerusalem Post conference and just put into Google Dan Diker and former special envoy Jason Greenblatt, we were actually featured at the Jerusalem Post conference in New York just a few weeks ago, or I guess it would be a month ago, because it was probably 35 days ago that the president went to the Gulf. And what Jason, who's a JCFA scholar, and I, as president of the JCFA, said at the time, and I'm delighted you asked the question because it's absolutely the right question to ask, is what the devil was going on there. There was a view in Israel, which I disagreed with, and Jason disagreed with, that Israel has been snubbed and the president really is creating some daylight, and it was sort of reminiscent of the kind of a little bit of the daylight that President Obama had created with Israel. And then we said, no, that is not the case. And it was our view that the president was pursuing a dual track foreign policy, which is to say that in the American first tradition, America is going to do what is good for American national security, and that could include a dual track approach, one to the Arab world and one to Israel, without that being a contradiction in terms. And I think that if we look back to January and then February 2025, where the president had just been inaugurated, who was the first foreign leader to visit? We both know it was Prime Minister Netanyahu. And then who was the only foreign minister within 8 weeks to return to the White House? There we have it, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. So in terms of President Trump's commitment to Israel and the Jewish people, we saw that it was very clear through his first two invitations to Prime Minister Netanyahu and his demonstrative compliment to Prime Minister Netanyahu and to his team, headed by Minister Ron Dermer, who, has become the most important critical member of Netanyahu's inner circle, and of course the very good relations with the United States of America. So when the president went to the Gulf, it was our view that he went to pursue an America first, what I call economic shock and awe strategy, which is to say, I'm going to go to the leader of the Arab Muslim world, which is Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and I'm going to pocket a whole lot of money in terms of investment, unprecedented in American history, unprecedented in American Mideast relations. He came home with commitments of untold amounts of money. I mean, the number $2 or $3 trillion has been mentioned. We have to see whether that actually materializes or that actually will remain in the framework of promises. But at the end of the day, he certainly did come back with almost an open competition between America's three allies in the region: Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and controversially, I must say, Qatar. So did you notice something, I think, very interesting for our viewers and listeners to pay attention to? And that is, there really was almost like an open auction between the three Arab powers as to who was going to outdo whom in order to please President Trump. And we saw that Saudi Arabia promised $600 billion in investment in the United States. And then the Emirates said, you know what, we're going to see you and double that. And then they offered $1.2 trillion. And then the Qataris said, well, wait a second, we're going to give the president an airplane. Right. So what this was, in our view, was an open competition, an open auction between these three major Arab leaders for a quid pro quo. And that quid pro quo was that the president would protect them by countering the Iranian nuclear program. And that, I think, is ultimately the way it played out, and the way the president has related to Israel in his effusive complimenting of Prime Minister Netanyahu right after the American attack with the six B-2s on Fordo, on Isfahan, and Natanz, is proof of that. Now, it is true, and I think it should be brought up. I did mention this on one of the main Hebrew Israeli broadcasts last night, and I actually succeeded to annoy some of my fellow panelists on this point. But I felt that it was very uncalled for the president to curse Israel using the F word for Israel and Iran equally. And Alan, and you have a great sense of moral clarity, and you always have had on this program. And I felt that with all of the great, in the dressing room last night for the panel, which was on the roof of the Tel Aviv municipality building, there was an American flag, where we've never seen that before. And I subscribe as an Israeli being very grateful to President Trump, who has proven himself to be an abiding friend. But I was disturbed by the fact that the president, who was obviously annoyed at Israel's planned very harsh response to the Iranian attack on Israel, just as the Trump ceasefire was being announced, and then an additional missile that was fired afterwards, that he would say Israel and America don't know what they're doing. And I said on the panel last night that type of moral equivalence from a cognitive, from a perceptual standpoint, is very problematic, because it sends a very bad message to America's friends and America's enemies at the same time.
So, you know what? Since you brought that up, I'm going to tell you my thoughts on that. And I'm saying, again, I'm a Republican, I'm a Trump supporter, but I'm not a blind supporter of anyone on everything. Here's what my read was after that, because I was watching Fox News, and Fox News is a very strong supporter of Israel. Most of the hosts are. But Laura Ingraham, who is a conservative, she played that clip. And she kind of was like, you see, Trump, because there are people, she was responding to those who say that Trump is Israel's lapdog, saying, you see, he's not. Look what he said to Bibi. I'm saying, you know what? Trump can get away with certain things, even if we don't like it. But you're cheerleading what he just did is sending a message to future Republicans, because there is a growing isolationist movement within the Republican Party. And a statement like that, as you said, moral equivalent, real close to it, it's going to show future Republicans we can support Israel and also take a swipe at them. So yeah, I think this was I didn't like it. Because it's Trump, I won't say, okay, he did it once, let's not do that again. But I'm concerned about what message it sent to other Republicans who do support Israel, but also feel like they can take a swipe at Netanyahu. With everything Israel has gone through since October 7th, yeah, this kind of criticism was probably uncalled for.
I think you make an important point here, Alan, and that is, it's not only the isolationists who appreciate Israel for what Israel is, and the fact that Israel does fight the wars for the freedom of the West, as Chancellor of Germany said very clearly at the G7, but there are forces that are really malign actors in the United States, like Candace Owens, who has proved herself to be a virulent anti-Semite, a racist, and a really hateful person that is totally ignorant about Israel. But the degree of her malign statements and her behavior and her very ill-advised rhetoric, Tucker Carlson has become a very problematic person for Israel, and he really believes somehow, I don't know how, that Israel is dragging the United States into foreign wars. Yeah. When, as you said in your opening monologue, the Iranian regime has proven itself an absolute number one strategic, if not existential, enemy of the American people. It is murdered more than 1,000 Americans in 14 strategic major attacks since 1979, when they kidnapped 66, but actually held 52 American hostages from the U.S. Embassy in Tehran for 444 days until January 20th, 1981, when Ronald Reagan first took the oath of office, and then they realized whom they were dealing with, and they released them. Wow. Subsequently, there have been hundreds, more than 1,000 Americans have been killed by the Iranian regime, not to mention attempted assassination of President Trump, as you mentioned, as President Trump, Secretary of State Pompeo, and UN Ambassador John Bolton, the national security advisor to President Trump in the first term as well. So if there ever was a reason for the United States to be fully supportive of Israel, to be fighting its war, America's war against America's number one enemy and the number one terrorist supporting regime in the world, it would be this particular particular case. So where do we go from here? I mean, this is a real rhetorical question that we're asking ourselves. And I will share with you that I said last night on the Ayala Hassan program, one of Israel's major broadcasts at 6 o'clock from 6 to 8 Israel time, is that it's my assessment that Israel has not struck a major strategic victory yet. They had major achievements. We broke what one brigadier general said on the panel. They broke the fear factor. They broke the what they called machsom pachad, which in Hebrew means the fear. I'm missing one of the nouns, but there was a blockage. There was a fear blockage that prevented Israel from attacking Iranian regime nuclear file earlier, and they broke that. They broke that blockage, or they penetrated it. And now Israel understands that it has got to take very serious military action the minute they see this regime starting to recover, whether that means replenishing ballistic missiles, or whether it means restarting the nuclear program or repairing, or whether it means bringing the Russian S-300, S-400 anti-aircraft systems back in place. Israel will attack those sites now without waiting.
So you mentioned two people, Tucker Carlson, who I agree with you. My assessment of him is he's problematic. He doesn't come out and bash Israel or the Jews, but he clearly has thrown his lot in with those who are hostile to Israel. Candace Owens, she to me is a cartoon character. She's dying for the attention. She writes the most obscene things on social media, and she does it, in my opinion, to get attention. She goes further than Nick Fuentes or David Duke ever went. And again, I think she's craving the attention. She wants to be called anti-Semitic. Now, there's something here I want to read because this came from a report that you put out. I'm just going to read it here from January of 2025. Dr. Dan Diker explained that Israel has become a leading force in the Middle East, particularly after recent operational successes against Hamas and Hezbollah leadership. However, he warned, and this is the important part, he warned that Israel is currently facing an eighth front, international, legal, political, media, and social terrorism, including threats from hostile elements in the United States and Europe. And that, to me, and I know that you've got limited time, but that, to me, could be an entire show. Because
you're right. You're very right about that.
Yeah. What we're going here, it's beyond. I can start with Congress that used to be bipartisan, and now you've got one major party pushing away from Israel. And I think that J Street is largely responsible for that. We have it in media. We have it in academia. We had it here in New York City last night. New York City, the capital of the Jews in America, just nominated for the Democratic mayor a hardcore pro-Hamas Islamist. I moved to New York when Ed Koch was the mayor. You had David Dinkins for one term, then you had Rudy Giuliani for 2 terms, Michael Bloomberg for 3. Then it went downhill with Bill de Blasio. Now we've got somebody who is an outright Islamist, and he's not even the biggest problem here in America. CARE, I forgot the leader of CARE, but he had made a video a few months ago talking about their long-term goal, where they're heading, that in a number of years they're going to have thousands and thousands of journalists. They're going to have members of Congress, school board members, mayors. This is all part of their plan. And Israel is still fighting. Let's beat Hamas in Gaza. Let's take out the nuclear reactors. We are, as supporters of Israel, as Jews, we have never faced such grave danger, and I don't know that we even recognize half of it.
I think you're absolutely right, Alan. This, what I would call the Islamic penetration of America. And I say Islamic and not Muslim per se, because, you know, there are many fine women and men who are of Muslim faith. They identify very patriotically as Americans. Some of them work for the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs.
Bring them on.
And in fact, here comes one now, Lieutenant Colonel Maurice. Oh no, Maurice Hirsch, you're not Muslim. No, he is. He'll just come in and just say.
Why are you saying that?
We're on a podcast. I'm on a podcast.
Shalom Aleichem.
But here's one of the great patriots. Lieutenant Colonel Maurice Hirsch, as you know, used to run the legal division at Palestinian Media Watch. We were lucky enough, Alan, to get him, to convince him to come work for the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs. And Maurice is responsible for the whole Palestinian Authority, monitor, reform, dismantle, and reconstruct initiatives as much as possible.
We are big fans of Palestinian Media Watch. We had Itamar Marcus on a few weeks ago.
Oh, there you go.
They do great work, I have to admit.
They do. They do great work. And what we tried to do with Maurice is to take it to another level of analysis and operational success by prosecuting campaigns to educate Americans, whether it's pay for slay, with the official Palestinian Authority policy using American and European and Israeli financing, as amazing as that sounds, as I say it, but to incentivize young men and women in the Palestinian Authority-controlled areas to murder Jews. And they have spent, on average, about $350 million a year over the last 7 years or so, since 2018, to do that. And that has been countered. That campaign has been led by Maurice, by us, and on the American side by our good friend Sandra Gerber, of the founder and chief investment officer of Hudson Bay Capital, who he is a shtickle expert in Mideast affairs, and particularly on the Palestinian issue. And he was absolutely crucial in getting the Taylor Force Act passed in Congress, which prohibits the United States from sending money to the Palestinian Authority as long as it is used for this pay-to-slay program. But this is a major, major problem that we face. And one, to get back to your question about the Islamic penetration of America, Yasser Arafat, the founder of the former chairman of the PLO, the PA, and Fatah, he was instrumental in injecting a narrative in the United States discourse that canceled Israel. He did it. He took General Giap, the former North Korean general, North Vietnamese general. He took his advice and said, you know what, this is a human rights issue. It turned, Arafat reinvented himself as a Mother Teresa, turning the Palestinian issue into a human rights issue, when in fact it was always an Islamist issue. And it was that Islamist underpinning that basically captured, co-opted, and kidnapped the U.S. discourse, particularly on university campuses. And that's why we saw the October 8th. This is your question. You go back to the October 8th moment when the Hamas actually won all this support particularly among young people in the United States, which is absolutely incredible to think that a Muslim Brotherhood radical precursor to Al-Qaeda would win so much American support. Then you go fast forward to the yesterday's victory of Hamdani in the primaries for New York mayor, and you understand that in these decades, this has been brewing. This Islamist impulse, penetration of America has been brewing, and it is really being played out now in these New York City elections.
Dan, do you have time for one more question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so now that Iran has been broken, again, whatever is going to happen, it's broken. What happens now with the axis of evil? Because you had Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. Iran for them was almost the center because they were a destabilizing force in the Middle East, which helped, distracted the U.S. from what China wants to do in Taiwan, Russia with Ukraine, and whoever North Korea wants to menace, which is usually South Korea. How is the breaking of Iran now changing this axis of evil?
Well, the temporary breaking of Iran also breaks apart the axis of what they call resistance or mukawama, or President Bush, the son, W. He called it the axis of evil after 9/11.
Right.
And he was talking about North Korea. He was talking about Iran, North Korea, and what was the third part of the axis?
It could have been Russia.
It could have been. It could have been, right? So what has happened here is that the weak vertebrae in this axis of evil, Iran, Russia, China, and I would add North Korea, is Iran. Iran's the weak link. So by taking out Iran now, at this moment, we have weakened China's economic influence, because 95% of Iran's oil is sold to China, and China takes 16% of its own oil reserves is purchased from Iran at prices that are favorable to China. Now, if China has to in some way replace Iran with another supplier, like in the UAE or the Gulf, those prices will be much higher, and creating a greater burden on China. Clearly, China for President Trump is America's number one enemy, and so the denuding of Iran will definitely compromise China's position also as a diplomatic player, because as we remember in 2023, MBS of Saudi Arabia and the Iranian regime used China as a mediator to try to return them to some sort of normalized diplomatic relations, even though in the mind of the Gulf, which includes the UAE, Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia for sure, it is clear that the Iranian regime is enemy number one.
Dr. Dan Diker, president of the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs, it was an honor to have you, and especially because you are the most sought-after guest in Israel media. So thank you for making the time for us. I look forward to speaking to you again, and continued Hatzlacha, and we're glad that now people are walking about again in the streets of Israel.